What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. It is that time of year. It is now July, so we are going to start preparing for these redraft leagues. When those drafts are going to be happening later this August, maybe even early September, depending on how late you guys like to do those drafts for your home redraft leagues. But don't you worry, if you guys are here for the Dynasty Fantasy Football content, which we love making the Dynasty Fantasy Football content, I wanted to share the content schedule for you guys over the next month or so, at least in July. Right now, the plan is to do Dynasty content on Mondays and Thursdays. So don't you worry, if you like the Dynasty content, it is here to stay. It is not going anywhere. Redraft content will be Tuesdays and Fridays, and then we will do best ball underdog streams on Wednesday nights. So that is the content schedule for the foreseeable future. But today, we are here to talk about the top 24 running backs for your redraft leagues, how they are going to perform this year. We're going to compare them to expert consensus rankings and where I have them in my rankings, see where the differences are, and talk about those differences in detail. So let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these rankings. So today we are going to start our way at the top of the tier maker. We're going to work our way all the way down to the bottom. We will talk about all 24 of these running backs and where they sit in my rankings and where they sit in these tiers. But starting in tier 1, there is only one player, and that player is going to be Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, we don't have to talk too much about Christian McCaffrey. This is an elite running back. He is going to continue to be elite as long as he is healthy, and the San Francisco 49ers rewarded him. They paid him. He is going to be elite, and he is going to be the running back one in almost every single draft that you have this year. Now, we do have the tier 2. The tier 2, I don't have anything really different from the expert consensus rankings, maybe a little bit of a different order, but this tier is going to be Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jonathan Taylor. These are all true running back ones for fantasy football. These are some of the elite guys, the top 5 running backs that you should be drafting in your fantasy football drafts. And like I said, there's not a big difference between where I have these guys ranked in my rankings and where the expert consensus rankings have these guys in those rankings. So we don't got to talk too much in detail about them either. But tier 3 is where it gets interesting because this is where I start to differ just a tiny bit from some of the experts. You do have my running back 6 right now, Saquon Barkley. We have my running back 7 as Travis Etienne. My running back 8 is Kyren Williams. Running back 9 is De'Von Achane. And Derrick Henry comes in as my running back 10. And so we do have 2 players here in this tier where we differ a little bit from the expert consensus rankings. So you guys can see where I have them right now. You see in these green circles, this is kind of the differences that we have right now at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about Travis Etienne. He is currently the running back 7 in my rankings. He has an ADP over on Underdog at RB10, so that does make him a little bit of a value in my rankings. And last year in 2023, he had a fantasy points per game of 16.6 points, which was 7th best in the NFL. Now, Travis Etienne, he was a workhorse in 2023. He posted top 10 numbers in snap share, opportunity share, carries, and targets. And all of that opportunity had Travis Etienne finishing top 12 in rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions, and total touchdowns. He also became one of only 2 NFL running backs in 2024 with 1,400 plus scrimmage yards in each of the last 2 seasons. The only other running back that did this was Christian McCaffrey, who sits in our tier 1. And Travis Etienne also forced the most missed tackles last year with 64 missed tackles. So going into 2024, I think there's going to be some chatter about people being worried about Etienne's workload, but Jacksonville has added 0 relevant running backs to this backfield. So unless you believe in Tank Bigsby or Dearness Johnson, and you believe that those players are going to eat heavily into Etienne's workload, he should still be in line for a ton of work in 2024 with an improved Jaguars offense and a healthy Trevor Lawrence. And the other running back in this tier that we differed on was De'Von Achane. So De'Von Achane currently sitting as my RB9 in my rankings. He averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game in 2023, which was 5th best in the NFL. Now, De'Von Achane, he was in a full-blown committee in 2023, but was still one of, if not the most efficient and explosive running back in the entire NFL with his touches. Achane led the NFL in runs of 40-plus yards with 5, and he did this on only 103 carries. The runner-up was Breece Hall with 4, and he did that on 223 carries. So that just proves that Achane has the ability to explode and win you a week in fantasy football on any given play. Now, we further see proof of this when we look at Achane being ranked 1st in yards after contact, breakaway run rate, fantasy points per touch, and yards per carry in 2023 as well. Now, some people are going to fade Achane due to worries about his durability, especially because last year during 2023 as a rookie, he did miss some time, but Achane has league-winning potential and was on a 17-game pace of 1,540 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns last year. So sure, there may be some risk to a guy like De'Von Achane, and Mostert certainly isn't leaving as long as he's healthy and on this roster, but this is an elite rushing offense, and Achane has elite talent, so you can choose to fade him at your own risk, but I will not be doing that. Now let's move on to my tier 4 here. This tier 4 does have 7 players in it, so we're going to talk a little bit about Isiah Pacheco. We'll talk about RB12 Rachaad White, RB13 Joe Mixon, RB14, James Cook, RB15, Josh Jacobs, and then 16 is Alvin Kamara, 17, Kenneth Walker III. So over here in this tier, we do have a couple players that we're talking about. I am higher than the expert consensus on Joe Mixon. I'm lower than the expert consensus on Josh Jacobs. So let's talk a little bit about these two guys. We'll start it off with Joe Mixon. Right now, currently sits as my RB13 in my rankings. Last year had a fantasy points per game of 15.7, which was 11th in the NFL. And Mixon was traded from the Cincinnati Bengals to the Houston Texans this offseason. But I don't want anybody to confuse the trade with the Bengals thinking that Mixon isn't talented anymore. This was strictly financial, and it was a business decision by Cincinnati, and probably the best decision for them long-term from a business standpoint, because they do have to pay guys like T. Higgins, Ja'Marr Chase, and other guys moving forward. Now, Mixon is coming off of 4 straight RB1 finishes, and he's now behind a better offensive line in Houston than he was in Cincinnati, and this Houston offense should contend for one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL during the 2024 season. Joe Mixon had a massive opportunity share in 2023 with the Bengals at 78.9%, and he never produced a fumble despite having a massive workload. Now, in Houston, I can see Mixon getting close or similar opportunities to what he did last year in Cincinnati. I mean, you look at Houston's depth chart, it's very thin behind Joe Mixon. They roster right now only Dameon Pierce, Dare Ogunbowale, and Jawar Jordan, all of which pose no real threat to Mixon's workload. So I think we could be looking at a value pick here in the middle rounds of drafts with true RB1 upside and a player who has the potential to post top 10 numbers in carries, rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions, total touchdowns, red zone touches, and fantasy points per game, just like he did in 2023 with the Bengals. And now moving on to a player that I'm a little bit lower on, we'll talk about Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. Currently, I have him as my RB15. On Underdog, he has an ADP of RB12. And in 2023, he posted a fantasy points per game of 13.9, which was 18th best in the NFL. Now, Josh Jacobs, he moves on from the Las Vegas Raiders. He goes to the Green Bay Packers after signing a 4-year, $48 million deal this offseason. However, even though that contract, it sounds great, when you look deeper in, you kind of notice that it's probably closer to a 2-year contract or maybe even a 1-year deal if Jacobs doesn't look the part or if rookie Marshawn Lloyd pops off the screen. Now, Jacobs, who saw the highest opportunity share in all of football last year at a whopping 84.9%, moves on to a much more crowded offense and a crowded RB room in 2024. And because of this, I'm projecting regression there with a lighter workload than we're used to seeing from a guy like Josh Jacobs. On top of that, Jacobs' efficiency numbers were alarming in 2023. Jacobs ranked outside of the top 50 running backs in true yards per carry, yards per touch, juke rate, and fantasy points per opportunity, and he was 48th overall in breakaway run rate. Now, part of this could be due to the fact that Jacobs saw the highest average defenders in the box last year with Aiden O'Connell under center, but when you are inefficient and seeing massive volume, it can kind of disguise the inefficiencies in the box score. I think this is kind of what happened with Josh Jacobs last year during 2023. My worry is that Jacobs probably sees that regression and opportunity, and maybe he won't be as bad as he was last year from an efficiency standpoint, but losing some work to a talented rookie like Lloyd in a system that likes to committee their running backs and being less efficient than he was in years past, that just leads to me feeling like he's being drafted a little too high than where I actually have him projected right now. So Josh Jacobs is just a guy that I'm a little bit lower on. And now moving on to our tier 5 here, we do have 7 more running backs to round out the top 24. We have 7 guys in this tier. So we'll start it off with James Conner as my running back 18, running back 19, Aaron Jones, running back 20, Najee Harris, 21, David Montgomery, 22, Rhamondre Stevenson, 23, Zamir White, and 24, DeAndre Swift. And so comparing this to ECR and to ADP, you guys can see on the screen now, a couple of the guys that we're higher on are James Conner and Najee Harris, and we're a little bit lower on Rhamondre Stevenson than ADP. So we'll talk about these guys, starting with James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals, who I currently have as my running back 18 right now. I look at his Underdog ADP. He's being drafted as the RB27 over there. So I think he is a massive, massive value in those Underdog drafts. In 2023, he had a fantasy points per game of 15.5. That was 13th best in the NFL. And the Arizona Cardinals, they did draft Trey Benson in 2023. And I think because of that, that is what is pushing James Conner's ADP way too low. Arizona has 1 year left on James Conner's deal, and the Benson pick to me feels a little bit like future insurance when and if the Arizona Cardinals do decide to make a decision on James Conner's future. But looking at 2023, James Conner, he was used heavily and he was productive when he was used. He posted top 10 numbers in opportunity share and rushing yards. But the more surprising thing, and the thing that I felt like was a little bit more impressive, was how efficient he was when he was getting these touches, because Conner was a top 10 running back in true yards per carry, juke rate, evaded tackles, breakaway run rate, and breakaway runs. And it's worth noting that he was hyper efficient despite the Cardinals being without Kyler Murray at the beginning of the year, and despite the Cardinals not having a true receiving threat at the start of the year as well, because Trey McBride didn't break out until the back half. And because of this, defenses were a little bit more dialed into the run game because there really was no passing threat and there was no receiving threats for the Arizona Cardinals. Conner being valued as the RB27 is ridiculous, especially considering the fact that they will continue to lean on him here in 2024. And we expect the offense to take a step forward, probably meaning that there's going to be more red zone opportunities for him this year than there was last. And because of that, I do believe that James Conner could be the single best running back value in all of fantasy football drafts this season. Now, moving on to another guy that we're a little bit higher on, let's talk about Najee Harris. I have him currently as my running back 20. You look at his 2023 fantasy points per game, he averaged 11.5 fantasy points, which was 30th best in the NFL. So not the greatest year from Najee Harris in 2023. And Najee Harris is one of the most polarizing running backs in fantasy football. And I get it, the Jaylen Warren hive, they're loud, but I'm still a firm believer in Najee Harris. And I do think he is a slight value in fantasy drafts this year. A lot is going to be made about Arthur Smith being the OC here in Pittsburgh, but it's worth noting that every single year that Arthur Smith has been an offensive coordinator or a head coach, he has produced an RB1 for fantasy football. This is excluding the year that he only had Tyler Algier in Atlanta. But even that year, you can look at Tyler Algier's usage. He was used very heavily in that offense. That being said, Arthur Smith, he loves to establish the run, and I think he's going to establish the run with Najee here in 2024. Najee has consistently been a 1,000-yard rusher every single season of his career, and outside of 2023, which was a bad offensive year for the Steelers, he has always scored double-digit touchdowns as well. I also look at the addition of Russell Wilson. I think this is likely going to benefit Najee Harris because you look at those older, more experienced veteran quarterbacks, they do tend to check the football down a little bit more, meaning that we could see an uptick in receptions for Najee here in 2024 as well. And lastly, I also think Najee is a little bit more explosive than people like to give him credit for. In 2023, Najee was top 12 in evaded tackles with 57, top 10 in breakaway run rate at 5.5%, and he was 4th overall in breakaway runs at 14. And all of this was while starting a year with a metal plate in his cleat that he did say really affected him. So overall, I do think Najee Harris is a slight value in our drafts and a running back that I am targeting and am just a little bit higher on than the consensus. And now moving on to a guy that I'm a little bit lower on, let's talk Rhamondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots. I currently have him ranked as my running back 22. His 2023 fantasy points per game was 12.1. That was 27th in the NFL. And Rhamondre Stevenson is coming off of a disappointing 2023 season where many expected him to follow up his breakout 2022 season after he posted 14.7 fantasy points per game and finished as an RB1. Unfortunately, Stevenson dealt with multiple ankle injuries in 2023, which forced him to miss some time, and the Patriots offense was absolutely horrible. And because of this, Stevenson finished outside of the top 20 running backs in opportunity share, carries, targets, red zone touches, rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions, total touchdowns, and fantasy points per game. Not only that, he was also pretty inefficient, posting numbers outside of the top 40 running backs in true yards per carry, yards per touch, breakaway run rate, and breakaway runs. Now this year, we do get a new look New England Patriots. Bill Belichick, he's out. Gerard Mayo's in, taking over as the head coach, and hopefully we have an improved run game under new offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, who over the course of his career has produced multiple top 10 rushing offenses. But it is worth noting that Rhamondre Stevenson, he did get some added competition in this backfield with Antonio Gibson signing a 3-year deal to join the Patriots, and I project Gibson to take some of the receiving work from Stevenson, which is likely going to cap his PPR value. Now, at his current cost, Stevenson isn't a total fade to me, but when I look at some of the other running backs in this tier, I definitely do prefer drafting some of these other guys over a guy like Rhamondre Stevenson. So there you have it, quick and easy, my top 24 running backs for redraft fantasy football. And if you guys like this type of format, if you like this type of video where we show you the full list, but we only talk about the guys that we have strong conviction on or we're a little bit higher or lower on than consensus, let me know. I'm going to do a similar video to this on Friday where we talk about the wide receivers. But if you did enjoy this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Also, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel and hitting that notification bell. That way you catch all of our new content in the future, whether it be redraft videos, dynasty videos, best ball drafts, anything you need. make sure you're subscribed to this channel. And last but not least, make sure you are a member of our Discord. I do have a free Discord linked in the description. I am in there helping you guys with your fantasy football teams all year long, 24/7, 365. So make sure you join that as we prep for these 2024 redraft drafts. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.